Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to go over Jasmy because as we've seen obviously in the crypto space at large this week with rate cuts and things like that, a lot more bullish momentum and bullish sentiment has come back into the crypto space. And so I wanted to look at specifically what this means for Jasmy and how this could look. Also, as I mentioned in some of our previous videos, we have been seeing some really bullish structures starting to form on the Jasmy chart, which is also really great news as well. So anyway, let's go on ahead and dive right in. So starting out, we can see that it's overall in the market, it's a pretty mixed day. Obviously, Fetch and Tau, two really big AI coins. AI seems to be the one that's kind of leading the way. Sui also has started to see a lot of traction lately. We can see Jasmy here actually almost not moving at all at minus 0.15%. So, obviously in the market, very overall mixed. Other than the AI coins, which, seem to be kind of the apparent winners so far, I wouldn't say, there's nothing too crazy going on. It's overall just like a pretty mixed sentiment in the market right now. Again, we have seen that week, month, and year have all flipped back to green. This was red at least for a little while within August. So, this has obviously moved back to green, which is good news. So moving on to the chart, there's a couple things that I want to look at here. Now, this kind of looks like, I usually try to keep my technical analysis pretty simple, just because I feel like sometimes, you got all these colors and lines and dashes and dots and all this stuff going on, and it can get pretty confusing pretty quickly. But there are several different things that I want to look at today, and so we'll address them in pieces, and then, I'll kind of simplify the chart as we go down. So the first thing that we can see here is I ran a fib retracement on the Jasmy chart just so we can kind of see what price has done and what we could potentially be seeing as Jasmy starts to make its run up. We'll come back to this, but as we have seen, we were in a pretty large descending wedge that we have broken and held above, which is fantastic news. So just to be clear, this is not financial advice. This is not anything, because I have no idea what's going to happen. If we did all know what was going to happen, obviously we would all do that and all make a ton of money together, right? So of course, none of us know what's going to happen for sure. But what we can see is, since it has broken out and stayed broken out, I mean, this is a really good sign, usually technically speaking, from a chart. And so I wanted to run the fib retracement because we can kind of see the different levels at which we're going to very likely run into some resistance on the way up. And so what we can see is, we had this little point of resistance here that we have broken over. We're kind of sitting like right on it right now. It's kind of been bouncing above and below this over the past about the past week, I would say. The next one we have is actually, this is a coinciding both fib level and is just kind of a historical level of support and resistance on the chart that we can see. Moving up, we've got a couple more fib levels, and then here we actually have a fib level and just kind of a point of support sitting pretty close. This I do kind of like when it shows this type of stuff, because we can see that like this really, I would not consider like a line in one place or the other, right? This whole zone basically between like 3.1 and like 3.2 cents, I would imagine this to be just an overall liquidity zone. So, we're going to move probably fairly easily and fairly quickly between both levels, not really settling per se on one support or the other is like the hard and fast rule. What we can see after that is, we have this next fib level that hits where we see some of these wicks getting close to about the 3.4 cent range. And then after that, we're starting to look up at wicks in here, and then we get back to the all-time high, or I guess the local high, I should say, at about 4.5 cents. The next fib level after we break this local top here is going to be back up at about 6 cents. And usually the 1618 level for fib is usually pretty attainable to hit, just historically speaking. Obviously, we have no idea. This is kind of, trying to take a best guess we can, and fib levels are usually relatively well followed, as we can see by some of these down here. So 1618 probably would be relatively attainable, and then after that, we've got 2618, 36, and then 4236. So looking at here, if we start to see we have broken above, so let's get rid of this just so we can continue looking through some more simple stuff. If we continue to break above, or to stay above, which we've now settled potentially on this support, and we continue to work our way up, this 6 cent range would kind of be the next point at which I would imagine we'd see assuming we recapture these all-time highs. And so if we look at the Bollinger Bands as well, we can see that we have seen a lot more upward momentum on these Bollinger Bands. They have kind of tightened down a little bit for where, obviously we saw them open up pretty wide here and here. So they have started to tighten down, which means it is highly possible that we see kind of a big move here soon. The other thing I also wanted to point out here is look at the volume. Obviously between, April and about June, we saw probably an average of 4 to 5 times more volume average than what we're seeing now. So the volume just really has not come back to the Jasmy chart at all. And yet we have still started to see some of this positive price action. And so really when we start to get to this level of volume, this is when I would imagine we're going to start to see 4, 6, 8, if we pull the fib levels back, we'll see, we potentially could be sitting up at, 13.3 cents before we break out of just the fib retracement level chart altogether. So obviously, that there's a lot of really good looking news here in terms of the chart, and the chart itself is really looking very, very healthy so far. Now, as we mentioned in the last video, the biggest problem or the biggest concern that we're having with Jasmy and just basically the wider crypto market as a whole is the prospect of a recession and how that could impact the chart, right? And so one thing that happened this week, obviously the Fed happened, they cut rates by 0.5%, which was relatively unexpected. The market reacted generally more positively than I was maybe expecting. I figured that there was a real possibility that if they cut more than what was expected, people would kind of get a little bit scared because the Fed is essentially admitting that things are worse than they expected them to be. So that ultimately, has been overall pretty good news. Also, what we did see is that the Bank of Japan kept their interest rates steady at about 0.25%, which, as we can see, the highest rate since 2008. There was, I think, wide concern that they may have started to pull their interest rates back just because of some shaky signals within their economy. But ultimately, they held this rate steady, which is pretty good. So there was some overall concern with inflation as well. We can see that it was about 2.8%. This was, I think, higher than what people were wanting it to be. So there was very slight concern that that the rates may have been raised even further. But I think that was a little bit more unrealistic. So I think the main concern was cutting rates back to zero in order to stabilize the economy. And so that didn't happen, which is good. That was part of the whole yen carry trade unwind that we saw is when Japan started raising their rates. And so further raising rates would have been really, really damaging. And then obviously reducing rates would have been fine, but it would have probably collapsed the price of the yen toward the dollar, which would impact Jasmy just because Jasmy is a Japanese-based coin. And so some stability within the Japanese market, I do think, is generally a good sign for Jasmy, just because of kind of all the things that are kind of going on within the Japanese market, and essentially the reality that Jasmy has their wagon hitched to the government of Japan. So that's good news. This is definitely a good development for Jasmy and the Jasmy team, even though it's not necessarily directly related to them. So moving on to Twitter, what we can see is that Team Lambo here had a technical analysis post that is, similar to mine in the sense that they had the wedge that we've now broken out of, but they actually also identified a downward channel that we can see here that is essentially kind of this next point of resistance that we're going to be running into. If we break through this, then obviously, returns to all-time highs I think are very, very doable. And then at that point, I think it's also quite possible that we see the return to that 1618 fib extension, which is about 6.1, 6.2 cents, which would be fantastic, obviously, from where we're sitting currently. So the other thing I wanted to kind of update you on, just in other news, was Janction was actually at Token 2049 in Singapore, which is really cool. They actually hosted their own event, and it looks like there was a decent number of people who turned out to that, which is really cool. It sounded like it was a decent event. Obviously, I wasn't able to make it to Token 2049 this year, but it seemed like it was a pretty cool event. Eventually, I think it'd be interesting to go to a Jasmy or Janction or whatever event at one of these conferences, just to kind of meet with the team and get introduced to them a little bit better. But overall, it sounds like obviously there's a decent chunk of people there, and it seemed to go pretty well. We did not see any sort of news or press releases or updates coinciding with Token 2049. So we haven't heard too much from the Jasmy team themselves as far as new press releases or anything like that. I don't think that's the end of the world, just because obviously they have jobs and they're working. But ultimately, the lack of updates isn't necessarily like a major concern to me. I think they're just working on stuff, right? And there's not a whole lot to update, at least as of yet. So anyway, if you found the information in this video useful, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really does help me out. I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So, obviously it's going to be a bit of a tall task, but hopefully, you guys are wanting to help me out. And obviously your help does go a really long way by both liking and subscribing. Also, if you have any comments, feedback, questions, concerns, or just want to say hi, please feel free to leave me a comment. I do read and respond to all of my comments. So if you do want to interact with me, that would be a great way to do that as well. So anyway, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.